So how often do you think we believe something in life, and particularly in marriage, without ever examining why we believe it?
Well, good question.
I mean, what comes to my mind? What comes to my mind is I think we both inherited, I for sure inherited, when we have vacation time, it's time to go see family rather than like, let's you and I go to a beach. It took us a while to realize this is what vacations and travels are when we first were married.
Yeah. It was 5 years in before we did that for ourselves.
And then we looked at each other, and I remember vividly going, this is what vacation is like. Yes. What have we been doing? Not that visiting family is not important, but man, there is so much more of just what did it actually take for us to examine that question of why we choose to do what we do?
Yeah.
Because we all have these things where we've absorbed something just because it's what we were taught or it's what we thought.
Yeah, we learned it from our family of origin or parents, whatever.
Right. And teachers. We don't ever have the question of, well, why? Why do I believe this? Because I think the doubt and the questioning of things is what solidifies our beliefs. And if you think about it, that's all of what we're going to be talking about today. And on a particularly sometimes third rail subject, if you think about it in the Christian sphere. And so here's the email that just kind of sort of set the stage because it's pretty succinct and simple in some ways, but it's from a husband. Thank you for your podcast and your words of wisdom. I'm curious to know if there's such a thing as Christian erotica. I did some research and I found some authors who write Christian erotica. In some of their links and websites, they described why they believe why it's okay. Myself, and I'm sure many other listeners would be interested to know your thoughts. Thanks.
I think it's worth, because we're going to have listeners that are like, what's Christian erotica? So maybe describe that.
Well, okay. So first off, it does exist where it's people that are writing stories under the auspices of we're keeping these Christian, which means usually they keep it in the marriage context only, and they have guardrails in place to allow for erotic stories. Okay. These are the only ones I've ever been exposed to, and these are usually from email saying, hey, have you heard of this site? And so I'll go check it out on I'm going to go a little bit with this, or nope, not going to touch that one because of my history with the subject of erotica and pornography.
Sure.
But I don't get the sense what they're really asking is this really a viable genre? Because it is. It's out there. There are several sites that people share stories or authors write stories, and they try to keep it under a Christian umbrella. But what I get the sense is actually being asked here is kind of the way we open the show, which is, what is it that we may believe or we've never actually decided for ourselves?
So, Dr. Corey, please tell me if it's okay to
even
use
the
or
wording
not.
Of this, like the research, the links that are sent, and even the statement of, I'm sure many other listeners would be interested to know your thoughts, is actually a cover of the simpler question that they're saying is, can you just tell me if this is okay?
Sure. Which isn't usually our avenue. We don't. We want people to think for themselves.
And it's also not a criticism of people that we will ask this. It's a human thing we'll do.
It is.
Is this okay? Is it all right if I do this? I mean, we do this in all areas of our life, but as it pertains to some of the subjects and topics we cover, and particularly going to be this one today, it's the wrong question. Because we're not going to be a moral compass for people. And that's the stance we've taken for a long time. We want people to make up their own choices in their own minds of what do you really believe?
So more of these are to understand the quote unquote Christian erotica better. It's typically written.
I have not had
audio?
anybody send something to me that's under the auspices of a Christian erotica that has visual components to it. No.
So they're trying to make it.
Playing in the fantasy world.
They're playing in the fantasy world, but not visual. It's audio or written.
Right. And it can be stories of what they themselves have done or do that they share.
Okay.
Right. And that's the little bit I have done to just try to understand the space. And that also brings up a pretty good distinction between when we're talking about the whole genre and the whole arena of erotica or pornography, because there can be a fine line between the two on how people will define those things. But there's the visual versus the audio or the written. All of them access different aspects of our brains. And I think that's a more universally established consensus of where the visual stands. It's pretty clear what visual porn is, what visual erotica is. You know, it's that idea of there's an objectification, there's an underbelly to it, there's a seediness to it. There's a whole world about that is incredibly destructive to the people involved in it and the users of it. And research continues to show that depending on the severity and the usage amounts. But that's not what we're really talking about, because the audio and the written is a little bit murkier of what does that mean. There's not a real person being filmed. The imagination does all of the work, which is where the fantasy life happens, where a lot of arousal can come from, is our fantasy aspect of our lives. The audio hits a different aspect of our brain that accesses differently when it comes to desires. And so it's understanding the difference, that there are differences between these two, or between all of them, if you will. But what I want to talk about on the clinical side of things is the mechanism underneath it all.
Okay.
Which is that idea of disconnection to create connection.
Yeah, because it sounds like, and hear me out so I make sure I understand what you're saying there on disconnection to create connection. Because it sounds like you're using that, you're kind of disconnecting from your spouse and connecting with whatever this audio or book you're reading, so that you can get aroused.
Yeah. And we need to distinguish between one of the paths that happen, right?
Okay.
Because you and I were having this conversation pre hitting record on today's episode, that there's a difference in my mind, because we've even said in the past of 100% of the arousal and desire patterns in my life are not going to come from my spouse. But we believe 100% of the energy in my arousal pattern needs to be steered towards my spouse, because there will be things that happen in my world and in my environment that will trigger and elicit reactions to me, because we as human beings are designed to respond to our environments.
We are. And walking down the street, there are things that I didn't plan that,
but it pinged something in my brain. And it got some patterns and hormones going.
Let me focus it on my spouse.
Versus I'm seeking it out. There's a difference.
Okay. So I'm seeking, I have to go seek out the erotica, whereas other things in my life, even if I get triggered, if I'm focusing it on my spouse, bringing it all home to my spouse.
Right.
That's one thing. But if I'm going to the erotica, it's a purposeful way for me to potentially get aroused.
Right. And again, I want to be very, very careful that saying we're not trying to take this conversation as a judgment. We're just talking about a mechanism, because the whole point of this is, if I'm willing to be more exploratory of what goes on with me, to ask better questions, I become more whole and embodied in my process of arousal and life and all of things that I want to be. Because a lot of times we don't have the courage to actually ask the questions. What are my arousal patterns? What are the things that get me going? What is this? And so that's where we're going to head, more than trying to take an indictment on anything someone may or may not be doing. And I want to be very, very clear about that. That's not our hope, is to come at this from a judgmental stance. But I want to talk about the mechanism of how often might be using, that's horrible. May we might. How often might we be using something that actually is a disconnection in order to try to create connection? Just to be aware of that. And that's the whole point.
Does it end up being real connection if you have that gap in there?
Could be.
I created the disconnection.
Could be.
Okay.
Because think about how often we could have some sexual encounter that started really, really good, and then we got disconnected in the middle of it. And then we use it, hopefully, to try to figure out, how do we get back to being connected? Which often means I need to get connected with myself first and then connected with you.
Okay.
So this is one of the subjects that's interesting, because our history.
Why is that interesting? Because of our history?
Because we have I brought this into our marriage of the pornography history.
Not Christian erotica though.
No, but there's still so many overlaps to the different avenues of this that it still has an impact on a marriage, and it did on ours. And so it's like you've got a history with this that's interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, as we're talking about this, as we're getting it started. Where are you in this?
Well, so for me, obviously, for porn in general, you got clearly I'm not neutral on that. I think that's a bad thing in a number of different ways, and go back and listen to our old podcasts about that. I'm not familiar with Christian erotica, although I'm personally not that familiar with porn either. I question the idea behind having to go outside of your relationship or forcing yourself to go outside of the relationship to try and find that. What is it that's causing that? What is it between the two of you that you don't get aroused between the two of you? Or
even with yourself, though, too, because there are components of I'm pulling from a lot of client data too here, because there's more and more firsthand accounts I'm getting from clients over the last 5 years where not Christian, audio erotica is a part of their process.
Sure.
For one or both of them.
Sure.
And that's just, they've used that as a way to try to become in tune with that aspect of their life, because it's harder for them to get it because of trauma or situations or whatever. And that's a way they can use it to access
and
it.
I get that. And I guess that's part of my question and kind of my internal struggle on things that I've been personally just trying to work through for, a decade or more, as I want... Schnarch uses the blessed few. I want to be one of those blessed few, right? That just has this fantastic connection with their spouse that carries over into the bedroom, and it feels like this idealized relationship where each of you are comfortable in your own skin and you satisfy one another in a number of different ways, but we're talking in the sexual realm here. And my idealized mindset is that's, and what I believe God has given us are these bodies and minds that can connect with one another as husband and wife, and that can come from the two of us. And introducing other things that may be other people's experiences and not ours feels like a gap to me.
Here's what's so interesting about this conversation, though, Pam. We didn't put this in our notes. I'm actually surprising you on this one because I hadn't even thought of it.
I like that.
Is how do we, as Bible believers, make sense of the Song of Solomon?
Well, and that's just it, right? You get to the erotica and reading Song of Solomon. How is that not?
It's painting
erotic.
A picture,
right?
It is painting an erotic picture.
It is,
and so. Again, this is where I want to try to be very clear about this is our dilemma that every single one of us faces. And how am I more and more congruent with who I want to be according to my values, how I want to live, how I bring myself forward, how I make sense and hold on to myself and embody myself. And so every couple, I fully believe this, every single one of us has to answer honestly, what does it take for me to get aroused? What does it take with my spouse? What is my process? Not what should it take? What does it actually take? Because that's good data for me to know.
Well, and then what do you do with that if it's not something that feels to you like is within the moral compass that you should live by?
That's the things I need to start sitting with, and not be so quick to be human on asking, well, is this okay? Wrestle with it on if I feel uneasy about something, why? What is that? Because because we all have this in some ways about our life anyway when it comes to our sex lives, when it started on the idea of, I feel kind of uncomfortable with this. I'm not sure about this. And I had to grow in it. And this is that same element of growing into a deeper dynamic by using this question as information, not indictment, because the information will tell us things on where we can go. And that's how we start to describe this gap better of what is it that helps me connect with myself and with you? What is that really? And if that's what I'm really wanting, because sometimes that leads to another big question of, is it what I'm really wanting when it comes to our sex life? Is what I really want a connection, or do I just want the act? And it's actually a disconnected act. And if that's the case, well, then my spouse is either blind to it or they're okay with it too, if that's what I'm after all the time.
Or they know it and they're just dissatisfied.
Maybe so. But again, this is the dilemma of this is it's not the permission question. It's the ask, what's the gap for me? Because we all have it. In some instances, I'm wondering if this is maybe part of the fall. Right?
How so?
Did Adam and Eve have a gap when it came to be fruitful and multiply? Was there a problem in that dynamic of arousal for either one of them? Or did the fall really elicit shame entered the world? And now all of a sudden that has a tremendous different impact on us. And so because of that, now we're wrestling with this. Okay, it's just free and easy, particularly in marriage. It doesn't just happen so easily like it once did. Mm-hmm. So it takes more emphasis. It takes more thought. It takes more erotica. It takes more fantasy. It takes more, because we all have these brains that are capable of producing a lot of different things that our bodies will follow. Understand your path is the point I want to try to get across. Ask yourself the questions of what is it about your path when it comes to your spouse and your own sexuality and your own desire pattern, and what is it you really want, and how congruent and clear is the goal. Because we could have these elements of, I'm using these things to try to feel connected, and I'm curious, does my spouse, are they okay with what I'm using to get there or not? Do they know what I'm using to get there or not? Because that's just good data about what's going on between us.
Yeah. Your spouse, you still ask, what is it you're listening to? What is it you're reading? And I think there's a lot of things that, because if you're coming at this from the Christian perspective, as with anything in life, no matter what you're saying or doing, if Jesus were standing in front of you, would you be using that?
Yeah.
What do you think he would say about it?
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, if that's where your base is, it is coming at this from a Christian perspective, I'm just going to pose that question to you.
Mm-hmm. And then now we need to ask, how do you close this gap? Right? What do we need to do that's more explicit in the sense of understanding, okay, I've started to discover this. So it starts with noticing the pattern that we keep asking so far of, what does my pattern look like? What does it take for me to have an arousal with my spouse or in my life? Where does it come from? Because again, this is a huge distinguishing of, am I seeking things out, or are things flowing a little easier just because there's going to be something that triggers something in us, and then it's easy to steer, but it's just that element of, it starts with noticing and then not trying to judge, just notice what actually is happening in the moments. It's like we've had years of talking about this in some ways on our shows of, how well am I aware of myself throughout the arc of a sexual encounter with my spouse? How well am I aware of my spouse in the arc of a sexual encounter with my spouse?
Staying in connection.
Right.
How am I staying connected with them?
Right.
Are they still in the moment?
And that's that question of, am I present with my spouse right now, or am I somewhere else? Just that simple. Am I here right now, or am I somewhere else? And if I'm reaching, why? What's that about? Because it could very well be, no, I want to be here, I'm just not there. That's good data to know. Or it could be because that's the only thing I can do, because this other part just, I don't know how to bridge it another way. And a lot of times it's because I haven't asked the question of, what if there are other ways? So the noticing done honestly creates where you'll start to see a pattern. And then you can, I use this in therapy a lot of time when I'll ask people, just try to be an observer of some aspect of your life, specifically over the next week or even longer, because you'll notice things and then you'll start to see a pattern, which then will help cultivate some themes. And now you know what you're facing. Because until then, I don't know. It seems too haphazard. Rather than I start to get better at realizing when this is happening, that's when I disconnect. Okay, now I got an idea of that pattern. All right, now I can be proactive to deal with it differently.
Yeah.
And as it pertains to this email, the dilemma is we can keep looking for someone else to say it's okay or not, or I can look behind the curtain and examine the harder work of, what do I really believe? Is what I'm doing I'm okay with? Perfect. If that's where you are, perfect. That's not our point's, not to talk you off of something or onto something today. We just want to clarify a dynamic and a mechanism that's going on, and then choose the one that makes you grow in the process, because that's the path that produces something more. And I'm watching your facial expressions and I'm not quite sure what to do with them.
Well, you might have to live with that for a while.
That is a route I'm familiar with. So when we look at this whole thing, as we start to close this today, Pam, it's interesting because I think I can apply this to a lot of areas of my life, not just my sex life. Right? I opened the show with the idea of vacations as an example of what are the things I do that I just do routinely because I've never actually asked the question of what's underneath it.
Yeah.
What's my real reason behind this?
Yeah.
So I move beyond the shoulds and I get into the choices. Because if you think about it, ignorance is easier. Permission given to me is easier. Somebody telling me, oh yeah, that's fine, go for it, is easier. But self-examination, self-confrontation actually requires more growth with that information.
Yeah.
It requires more of me. And so the couples who grow, in my experience, aren't the ones that find the right answer from the right authority. They're the ones that actually get honest enough with themselves and are okay believing what they believe in that moment, knowing it will evolve, it will refine. We're always in the process of becoming, and we sharpen up some things. That is part of the process. And that's part of what makes life the abundance of what it can be. And for sure what marriage can be. Because I start to become more solid with my feet under me. And so here's where we want to land today, that if in today's episode, anything landed uncomfortably, we want to hear, what are you noticing that made it? What was it? What was the discomfort that was created from this? That's the email I'd love to hear. Because my wife's going to have some after we hang up after we hit stop on this one, because I'm watching her face all through this.
Well,
show.
it's funny because there are shows where it's like, because we've said you got to figure things out for yourself, right? We're not your parents. We're not whoever's going to tell you, well, here's what you should believe. We have a belief system. My guess is it's fairly clear on what our belief system is, but oh my gosh, hopefully it is. But we don't come on here to tell everybody that we have the ultimate answer on what is right or wrong.
Right.
And sometimes maybe I feel like we should.
Yeah.
But, that's not always my call.
Yeah. But it also doesn't serve people well. There's standards and there's processes that are important for people that's our own development and growing in our personal relationships.
And so we love the listeners that are thinkers and that you start standing on your own 2 feet to say, here is what I believe and here's why I believe it. It's not just because Dr. Allen on a podcast said this, mm-hmm. or so-and-so at whatever place said this. Well, I trust them, so I believe that's what's right. You gotta stand on your own 2 feet.
Mm-hmm. And that's what we want to hear from is how is this process going for everybody in this? As you're hearing these conversations, feedback@sexymarriageradio.com. We'd love to know where you are. So however you took some time out to spend with us today, thanks. and we'll see you next time.